Hello, and welcome to the Professional Procrastinator Podcast. I'm your host, Rohit Rohila, and if you're tuning in, chances are you're ready to turn the page on your procrastination habits. Each episode is a step towards action. No guilt, just positive energy and better strategies. Let's jump in and make procrastination a thing of the past. Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Professional Procrastinator Podcast. I'm your host, Rohit Rohila, and today we are going to be talking about the speed that this podcast came together. I'm going to go over how quickly everything happened and how I didn't let my past hold me back. And I'll dive into a little bit about what that means. So for those who are not familiar with some of the projects that I've been involved with, one of my main projects is the GYST podcast. Stands for Get Your Sh Together. It started in 2015, and the way that it came about was I was having certain conversations with some of my friends just around the topic of personal development. I've always kind of surrounded myself with people who are forward-thinking, have a positive mindset, positive outlook on life, high energy, and there were two people in particular, Kyle Reed and Christian Cloud, and we would have these conversations all around personal development all the time. So the thought process that I had was, why not just create a podcast out of it? I mean, we're talking about this stuff anyways. What's the difference if we just put a microphone in the middle? And sure enough, they were on board. One day we got together at my house and I made a makeshift studio out of a spare bedroom. It had a single microphone in the middle, and we kind of mapped out what this podcast would look like. So we came up with ideas and the naming, and I knew in the back of my mind before the guys even came over that we had to record that day. If we didn't record that day, there are several possibilities that would derail everything. One, they could easily talk themselves out of this, particularly when it comes to experience. If you think about starting a podcast and being on a podcast that's heard worldwide, you're going to have a lot of imposter syndrome. If this is something that I'm struggling with, the world of personal development, who am I to teach others about it? And so imposter syndrome is front and center right away. The other thing is it can become so complicated that you're not taking the initial action items that you need, the initial steps to do the podcast in the first place. So I knew I had to do it then, otherwise they would talk themselves out of it. So we started brainstorming on the ideas, and afterwards we kind of all looked at each other and we're like, okay, well, this was a good session. I was like, great, ready to record. And I still remember that moment because both Christian and Kyle looked at each other like, what, are you going to stop this, or am I going to stop? Like, you could tell that there was a tremendous amount of hesitation. And so I acted quickly. I was like, okay, well, let's just record, and hit the record button before they were even ready. And if you listen to that first episode, you can find it at gystpodcast.com. Again, gystpodcast.com. You can tell we didn't know what we were doing. At one point, I think we even questioned whether the microphone was even on, but we did it. And here we are now in 2023. The podcast has been going on for 8 years. It's been a huge success, listened all over the world. And that's how that podcast kind of came about. There's been other podcasts that I have been a part of. One was Creating Motivation. It was a personal development podcast that I started with a friend. Lasted, maybe 6 months or so before that one kind of stopped. And then I was the executive producer behind another one called Fresh in Your Life, which was centered all around motherhood, something that I didn't know too much about. But that was a big success in itself. And for those of you who are from the Seattle area, if you watched Channel 5, which I think is King, Channel 7, which I think is a Cairo, or if you're a fan of the Seattle Seahawks, which if you live around here, you most likely are, the name Tony Ventrella should ring a bell. So I've got another podcast with Tony. I am a co-host on that as well as the executive producer, and that's called Talking Sports with Tony V. And in it, we not only do we talk about sports, but we interview various legends from Seattle sports, such as KJ Wright, Rick Riz, Doug Baldwin, many others. I have a lot of experience when it came to podcasting. The way that this podcast started was that I was doing research into procrastination just for myself. I want to know what some of the hiccups that keep popping up in my life, some of the obstacles that are always appearing, what was I doing to create those? And what are some strategies and tips that I could use to improve my life? And the more I dived into it, I realized that it's not just saying things like, I'll do it tomorrow. There was so much more to it, a depth that I didn't even know was there. And it was crazy to think about all these self-limiting beliefs and other obstacles that I was creating without even realizing that I was doing it. That's when I had the idea of taking all this information that I've been learning and writing a book. And that is literally what I've been up to for the past year, writing a book. It's called I'll Do It Tomorrow, Ends Today. And right now, as of this recording, I'm putting the final touches and polishing it up. And if you would like to know more details, you can go to I'llDoItTomorrowEndsToday.com. In fact, I even have some tips available for you if you would like. So if you go to I'llDoItTomorrowEndsToday.com/5 tips, you can download 5 tips that have helped me tremendously when it comes to my own procrastination. So back to this podcast and how it came together. It came together extremely quick, and I'm going to walk you through everything. And it was about a week from concept to you listening to this podcast right now. It started off on a Monday, and I just couldn't sleep. I just had a lot of thoughts going in through my head. I got done with an incredible meditation session where I started thinking about my life, the direction I want to take it. And I realized that I want to do another podcast, a solo project. And this was a huge break from anything that I had ever done. I was always in a podcast with other people. So the fact that I would be challenging myself to do one solo was quite the experience. So that was Monday. Monday, boom, thought process comes into my head. I should do a podcast. Tuesday, I started mapping out what that podcast would look like. I started coming up with some episode ideas, and I knew that I wanted to do it around procrastination, especially because I've done so much research about that topic for the past couple of years while I've been working on the book. So I knew procrastination would be the topic of the book. So I started mapping it out, different ideas, different topics, what the intro would look like, the outro, what that would look like. I started working on the different behind the scenes things in order to start getting that ready. Now we're on Wednesday. So by Wednesday, I had come up with 4 different names for the podcast, and they were The Procrastinator's Guide to Success, Professional Procrastinator, Procrastination Breakthroughs, and The Procrastination Solution. Now, all 4 of those made sense to me on various levels when it came to marketing, SEO, the draw for the average person who would be essentially the audience. But I realized if I want to move quick, I can't think about this. I can't overthink it. And that is a problem that a lot of entrepreneurs, businesses, and content creators have, is they have the mindset that they know what the audience wants. For me, it's the complete opposite. If I leave it up to the audience to decide these tough decisions, then not only does it free me up from having to make those, but it resonates with them. That's what they want. And so I went to Facebook and put up there, I was like, here are 4 different names. What do you guys want? And the overwhelming one was Professional Procrastinator, which is why this is the title of this podcast. So that happened on Wednesday. Now we're on Thursday. So Thursday comes around, I create 6 different podcast covers. And again, went back to Facebook, popped it up there. label them all A, B, C, D, E, F. Which one do you guys want? And the overwhelming one was the one that you are looking at now. This was the cover. What's interesting is, of all the covers that I presented, this one was my least favorite. I don't even know why I put it up, but it's the one that most people wanted. And when it came to that, I mean, it wasn't just, it didn't just win out by a small margin. It was overwhelming that this is the one that everyone wanted. And people were leaving comments of, this one resonates with the title of Professional Procrastinator. This one gets the message across. And for me, I'm looking at it and it's my least favorite. But again, it's not what I want. And I'll touch on that coming up. So now it's Thursday. I have the name of the podcast. I've got the cover. I've mapped out some episodes. Now we come to Friday. And Friday is when I recorded the very first episode. Whew. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, that episode was one of the most difficult things I have ever done. It started off, I started off around 9 a.m. working on it and didn't complete it until roughly 9 p.m. for an episode that, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 minutes long. It was extremely, extremely difficult for me. The reason being is, first off, this was my first project that I'm doing by myself. And that added a complete layer of complexity, because when you have a podcast with others, you have someone that you can bounce ideas off of, or you can take what they're saying, reply to it, and add a depth to the conversation. But when it's just you, and you are essentially talking on the fly about certain things, it was so difficult. So the reason why it took me so long was, first off, I can't even tell you how many episodes I recorded and just got so frustrated, deleted the whole thing. That happened multiple times. The other thing is, I spent a great amount of time researching on YouTube on how to have a solo podcast. And there were other people who provided tremendous feedback. And I realized what I had to do was script it out. Now, that's something that I've never done. In all the videos I've done, the podcast episodes I've done, I've never scripted anything out. I'd have bullet points, but that's about it. Everything else would just flow. And so to have more of a script was so outside of my comfort zone that it became difficult. At the very beginning, was just reading the episode, and then I would listen back, and it was just boring. It didn't have any personality to it. And so it was extremely difficult for me. I took a break, and I went downstairs. And for those who know me, know that one of the true passions of my life is Lord of the Rings, anything Middle-earth related. I've read it all. I've watched it all. I've just completely engrossed in the legendarium that Tolkien has created. So when I saw the Two Towers was on TV, I needed to take a break. Sure, I'll watch it. And I believe the universe speaks to you, and you need to be receptive to it. And where the movie was at that point was at such a critical point of the movie. It was towards the end. Samwise Gamgee, one of the characters, is talking to one of the other characters, Frodo Baggins. And at the time, hope was fading. Their mission, their goal was coming to an end as a failure. And that's when Sam looked up and just sees this city in just complete rubble. And that's when he said an amazing, amazing speech. And I'd like to play that for you right now.
Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going because they were holding on to something.
I know it sounds crazy, but this just motivated me to keep going. I struggled. It was hard. I wanted to stop and just throw this idea away. But I fought off my own perfectionism by understanding two key things. One, my good enough can be someone else's perfect. And two, my perfect only exists in my mind. Once I thought about those things, it just transformed everything that I was doing. I didn't need to be perfect. Who am I doing this for? I'm doing it for the audience. If I have something that I can share, something that I can let others know that may transform their life, it's my responsibility to share that. By me holding on to it, that's not helping anyone. That's me playing it small. That's me living my fears and letting my fears win. And the other thing is the concept of perfect. Who defines what that is? Who defines what a perfect podcast episode for this podcast is? Only me. It exists only in my mind. So if that's where it lives, don't I also have the power to do something about it, to rewrite it? And that's what I did. So I came back into the studio and fought through and cranked out that very first episode of the podcast. Along the way, I learned a tremendous amount. It's not about what I want. It's about what the audience wants. And I touched on this a little bit earlier, but too many entrepreneurs, businesses, and content creators have the mindset that they know what the audience wants. If you are the one dictating to the audience what they want, you're telling them what they need and what they deserve. That doesn't buy loyalty. That doesn't provide a service. This is a partnership. I completely understand that. The more I can give to you, the audience members, the more I receive back. And I'm not talking about monetization. I'm not talking about fame, glory, anything like that. But even with the GYST podcast, I love receiving emails from people who have reached out to me all around the world, talk about how much this podcast has meant to them, how it's transformed their lives. I'm telling you, one of my favorite quotes by the late, great Zig Ziglar is, you can have everything in life you want if you will just help enough people get what they want. And so many people out there think about what can they get out of it? What's in it for me? But instead, if you're like, what value can I provide everyone else? That's truly what makes you valuable. Think about the workplace, for example. The old school philosophy is the more information I can hold on to, the more valuable I am, the less likely I am to be let go by the company because I've got all this knowledge. I'm irreplaceable. That's the old school way of thinking. That's holding on to information. That's not helping you. That's not helping the company. That's not helping anyone. Instead, if you give away all that knowledge, if you help others attain that knowledge, now all of a sudden you're a resource. And that's when you become indispensable. So to sum up, today we talked about how this podcast came together in less than a week. I didn't overthink. I let others make the tough decisions for me, and I found my own flow. I want to share my top 5 tips about procrastination with you. So if you go to I'llDoItTomorrow.com/5 tips, you can get those 5 tips from me. Again, I'llDoItTomorrow.com/5 tips. Thank you for spending your time with me. Hopefully it wasn't just another form of procrastination. I'm Rohila, reminding you that sometimes later becomes never. So do it now. You deserve it.